My name is Brian Peterson. My hometown, I'm originally from Miami, Florida, born and raised out there. I am married to Vanessa Peterson. We have a 19-month-old little baby daughter named Kiana. Currently, I am working as a full-time artist and founder of Faces of Santa Ana and Faces of Mankind. And so my life looks like being creative and exploring all the creative ways God wants to impact his world through art and creativity. Before I took the risk and jumped out into like full-time ministry and artists, I used to be a car designer. I've worked for Chrysler Motor Group in Michigan. And then most recently out here, I was a car designer at Kia Motors for about 9 years here in Irvine, California. So I've taken many trips to Korea and I've been all around the world, traveling the world, being a car designer for Kia, going to shows, product launches, all those great things. Funny, I know food really well. Like I know samgyeopsal, I know budae jjigae, I know tongtae jjigae. Like I know how to go places and order food. So here in California, when I go out and order food in like Korean barbecue restaurants or just any restaurant that's Korean, I'll usually ask for the food in Korean and they'll get shocked, right? I knew from a very young age that I would do something that involved like drawing and creativity and arts. And I remember just being a young kid and having this word spoken over me a lot of times in my life that oh, if you're going to be an artist, you're going to be a starving artist. So there was a point in my life that like fear kind of gripped me to the point that I was thinking, wow, if I want to do the thing that I love, I'd probably starve, right? And so there was this point when I started looking for what can I do with my arts that allows me to make money. And there was, I think it was in high school, there was a presentation given that car designers are actually sketch artists and they draw the cars on paper and digital media, and then it becomes a real car. And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's really cool because I like cars and I love drawing and creating. And so that was my way of figuring, in order for me not to starve and be a fine artist, I must find a place to put my talent. And I started running after that. Another thing is there was like some crazy fact that they used to talk about car designers. And they always used to say like becoming a car designer is as hard as becoming an NBA player. The industry is so small, it's super competitive. There's people from all over the world trying to get into every design office. And so I took that as like a challenge. I'm like, okay, if that's the hardest road to becoming a designer, like that's the road I want to take. And so I gave it my all. I gave it every ounce of who I am. One of my motivations when I decided that I wanted to design cars came from actually my stepmother. She found a magazine with an article about a man named Ralph Gilles. And Ralph is an African-American man. He designed the Chrysler 300 and he was like rising the ladder, ultimately becoming the vice president of design for all of Chrysler Motor Group. And so I had this man's article cut out and it was placed in like a binder. It was like my career folder or whatever. And I would look to that as inspiration. And it helped me realize that like, here's someone that like looks like me and is achieving his dreams. And so it became like this benchmark for me of like, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. It would be the same way someone would look at like, if you were wanting to play basketball, you would look to Michael Jordan and say like, if he can do it, I can do it. And so I had like a role model slash mentor that was far away from me. I would only like read about him. And I actually ended up working for this guy years later. Being a car designer was my dream. Like if that was my dream job, if you asked me when I was 18 years old, what I wanted to do with my life. And I want you to understand too, that all of this is pre-Jesus. This is pre me giving my life to Jesus. So this is Brian Peterson in the world with his own dreams and his own plans and his own goals, right? And so I end up achieving my dream. I end up becoming a car designer. And I just want to say like the money is great, the travel is great, the work atmosphere is great. Every time you tell people what you do, they view you as like some like celebrity of like, oh my gosh, you designed that car that I see on the road. And so like it like met all of my expectations, even to the point when like a car would come out on the road and I would see it and I'm like, oh cool, like I designed that interior, right? But there was a moment where like I gave my life to Christ, I became a Christian, and what used to satisfy me didn't satisfy me anymore. Like there was something deeper that I think the Lord was looking for in me. So then it became like, oh, I'm doing all these things that I used to love, but like, why is there this feeling of like there's more available? And that's when he started pulling out creativity, and I started painting again and all the things you see behind me. But for me, it was like Brian's dream, my own goals came true. And then I met Jesus and he started to shift and move and mold my heart. And everything I thought I loved and I wanted was beginning to turn into something new. I imagine it's like when he goes up to some fishermen and says, "Follow me." And they drop their nets and leave their boats and they go and follow him. And we don't quite really think about the nuances of that story, but these were probably some of the best fishermen of their day. That was their business, that was their income, that was their livelihood, that was their skill set. But they chose, for some reason, to leave that all behind and follow him. And my story has a lot of similarities to that. So here I am as a car designer, working for Kia out here in California, give my life to the Lord, start like attending church. And really, what I mean by attending church is I'm seeking to know Jesus and his kingdom, right? So I'm attending church, reading books, watching YouTube videos. A little bit about my personality is that when I find something that I love, I dive 150% in. Like you have to sometimes like pull me out of the hole. And my whole life up until this point has been like, Brian was obsessed with space, and then Brian was obsessed with BMWs, and Brian was obsessed with Kobe Bryant, and then Brian was obsessed. Like I had all these obsessions that I would find the end of them. I would reach the end of that obsession, and there'd be no more for me to like study or fall in love with until I met Jesus. And so here I am encountering Jesus and finding that like there's no end to knowing about him because he's alive and he's real, right? And so I'm like diving into this life of like seeking his kingdom, not even knowing that that was like something that he asked us to do. I'm such a baby Christian. And it's starting to transform me to the point that like I'm telling people at work about Jesus. And there's moments where I've like gone into my manager's office and told him about Jesus and prayed. And like, so it's like transforming everything about me until the point when I felt the Lord call me to speak to the first man experiencing homelessness in my neighborhood. And so then it became this life of like, I'm connecting with my invisible neighbors. I'm connecting with the broken, the lost, the hurting. I'm feeling Jesus's presence and like his mandate for my life in those moments. And I'm using my lunch breaks outside of Kia to go hang out with my neighbors experiencing homelessness in my city, right? And so my life started to get like incredibly radical. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Sometimes it didn't make a whole lot of sense to my wife, Vanessa. Like I was doing things that I never imagined myself doing because I kind of felt the Lord's presence surrounding it. And I felt his cheer and his gladness when I was stepping out doing unconventional things. And so my road was, I wouldn't say it was like this narrow path of like, I know exactly what Jesus is doing in my life and I'm just following it. My road was like a spider web where I'm just like doing all these things, going wherever, speaking to whatever, praying for people, sharing and posting about Jesus. Like something captivated me about him where it just felt like, well, I feel like I've tasted like the best steak in the world and I want to give that away to other people. And so it changed me at work. People were kind of like, what happened to Brian? It was like this radical change that happened. I was actually born again. Like I was a new person. Like the old me had gone. And it really hit one time on our anniversary. My wife did this beautiful like anniversary gift for me. And she put these pictures from our relationship all up our staircase on the way to our loft. And so the first picture was like our first meeting, first date. And the most recent picture was like us in the current day. And when I got to the top of the stairs and I saw all the pictures, she was crying. And I'm like, why are you crying? Like, this should be like happy. And she's like, well, I realized that the man I fell in love with, like the first picture at the bottom of the stairs, is dead. Like he's gone. Like you're so different than the guy that I first met. And she's like, you're now this new guy, which is like the first picture at the top of the stairs. And she's like, I'm learning how to love the new you. Like the Lord is teaching me to love this new creation that is Brian. And it hit us both so strong because I'm like, wow, all the things that I used to used to love, used to cherish, used to worship, right, are gone. And so if there was like any advice I can give to people is like seek the kingdom and seek Jesus with all of who you are, and let your path won't be like this narrow, like I know exactly what to do. The path will kind of look like a web, I think. And the web is like this beautiful journey of exploration and childlike faith and wonder, and just following him and doing things you've never done and taking risks. And it's kind of led me to where I am now. And I actually like, I think about it a lot. Like I was way more childlike back then. I think as you grow and form systems and organizations and things around you, you can get a little less naive. And I was so naive back then that I would kind of do anything, right? And so I want to maintain that naive childlike spirit, but that's a little bit about that journey. So my wife Vanessa has been amazing. I'm learning as we sort of walk out life together, like who she is to like our kingdom relationship. And she's like a hyper discernment person. And so my wife has incredible, incredible discernment. I haven't always listened to her discernment because in the beginning, I kind of just thought it was just her opinion. And as I'm growing and learning, and as we're growing together, I'm learning that she has a beautiful gift of discernment that comes across as, hey, I'm just feeling this, so maybe we should or shouldn't do XYZ, right? And it's actually turning into like, no, the God is putting answers in my wife, and she's discerning what we should do, who we should talk to, where we should kind of go, kind of so to speak. And it's beautiful, and it hasn't always been easy with Vanessa and I in ministry. We actually got married right before Faces of Santa Ana started, and it was like this journey of like, this is not what marriage looks like. Like, why does marriage look like homelessness in our backyard, in our cars? Like, why are we like, this is not the white picket fence Starbucks dates that she imagined. And we had a really, really rough time in the beginning. And I really feel like whatever the Lord calls us to, there's often a cost. Like there's a cost associated with following Jesus. And for us, it was costing us our marriage in the beginning. Luckily, we held it together, but there was real moments of us on our face on the floor after arguments, praying, asking the Lord to like help us understand what it looks like to be married and minister together. And you got to understand, I had a job. And so the only time I can really paint and be with the homeless is after 5 o'clock. And so it left little time for my marriage. And it was this sacrifice that I wasn't upfront about because I fully didn't understand what I was doing. And luckily, there was a moment of surrender for us where we both surrendered it all to Jesus, like active surrender. I mean, like faces on the floor crying, asking the Lord for help. And he met us there, and he changed it all. He gave me wisdom for boundaries, and gave my wife discernment and involvement in his ministry. And since then, it's been really fun. It's been a good journey, but it wasn't without a cost. It was hard. Yeah, that story happened pretty fast. And so like the beginning of it is like seeking the Lord and just kind of walking with him. And it ended up with one night seeking the Lord. And I was reading this book called Love Does. And the book is about like making love an action. So what if love was something you did and not something we just said? And so I'm reading this book. It's a Christian book by Bob Goff. And the book is about loving your neighbor. And I hear this man screaming outside of my house, a man experiencing homelessness that me and Vanessa, my wife, would often hear screaming. It wasn't uncommon. And this day, I'm like in the midst of these pages reading, and I'm like, wow, like that guy is technically my neighbor. Like if I'm honest, he lives outside my building. And so technically he's my neighbor, and I don't even know his name. I actually call him the screaming homeless man. Like that's how I refer to him in my own household. And so I remember just looking at Vanessa and saying, like, this has got to shift. This has got to change. Like, we got to get to at least know this man's name. So at this point, I wasn't painting at all. Like, I was actually like, I would consider myself like stuck or like writer's block. I had like artist block for like 10 years, right? And so I went out to meet this guy 2 days later. I never intended to paint his portrait at all. I was just going to know and learn his name. And so I sat down next to him and started talking. He told me his name was Matthew. And in the midst of that conversation, like, you got to understand, he didn't smell great. He didn't have a shower in probably over a year. His beard was overgrown. His clothes were disheveled. His shoes didn't match. I don't even think he had laces in his shoes. Like, his fingernails were overgrown. And through all of that, it was like the Lord was showing me his heart for like a person. So I saw like beauty. I saw masterpiece inside of this big image of what we maybe consider failure, right? And so I'm looking in the face of failure and defeat, and I'm seeing masterpiece, right? And so I just asked him, I said, hey man, can I paint a portrait of you? Just like that. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay. And so I just took out my phone. I was like, I'm just going to take a couple photos. And so I did. I took some photos of Matthew and went home and started painting his portrait. And this is one of those stories where, like, when people look at what I do now, they think that I sat down at a desk one day and maybe wrote down a business model of what I wanted to do, and I got a download from the Lord, and I knew I would go out and paint portraits of the homeless. And it's not that case at all. It was like the Lord sent me through a stirring in my heart to go speak to the screaming man. I didn't even know I was going to paint him. And so these are the things where, like, if we would listen and obey, or try to obey his voice, because you only really know it's him after you see the fruit of your obedience. But where would we end up if we did those small things, like the small yeses that lead to big change? And I feel like all that the Lord wants to do is have us say yes to small things, like go here, speak to this person, love that person, say hello and give a hug to that stranger, whatever it is, right? And if we do these small yeses, sometimes I think we land on big impact. And so end up painting Matthew's portrait, and people on Facebook were asking, was it for sale? And it shocked me. So here's another thing. I said yes, I painted the portrait, didn't plan on selling it. And then people were asking, was it for sale? And then I felt like the Lord was just like, well, you should sell it and use the money to help this guy out. And so that's what I did. So that's how Faces of Santa Ana started. I still haven't written a business model. I'm not against business plans, but I think just the way the Lord speaks to me, it just feels like I'm in this like childlike discovery with him and life. And I just kind of walk that out the best way I can. And it usually looks like loving and encountering people in beautiful ways. I've painted, I believe it's around 42 paintings myself. And I think I've sold about 37, 38 of those. So we've been able to do really incredible things. But now there's also other artists that are sort of partnering with what we're doing. We can get into that later if you'd like, but collectively we've painted well over probably 150 paintings collectively. And it's been a cool journey. I sell the portraits. And so the portrait ends up going to whoever buys it, whatever collector it is. And then we use the money to help the person in the painting. And so we'll ask them, we'll say, hey, you have X amount of dollars in your, what we call a love account. And I asked them, how can we help you with the money we've raised? And so we kind of put together a plan and say, this is how we're going to help. These are the things that you're desiring, wishing, needing, desiring, whatever it is. And then we walk that out with them and form relationship and trust. And we really operate in the intangible areas of homelessness. Like, I don't have a spreadsheet with how my paintings have affected people, but I have stories. I have stories of like what has gone on in their hearts, and stories of what has gone on in other people's hearts as they've seen the work. And I think that's what art is supposed to do. Art is supposed to operate in the intangible realm of our human experience. And that's kind of what we do here.